So welcome to our final wrap-up, an extended wrap-up from Baku here at COP29. Here We Don't Have Time in our Climate Hub.
Well, we had so many great guests here, and we're not done yet because we have two more fantastic people waiting here to join with their voices. We have had scientists, we've had climate advocates from the youth movement, we've had politicians, decision makers, etc. So it's been fantastic 2 weeks to be broadcasting here from Baku.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had some artists as well before, so that's good too. We'd like to take the opportunity here in this wrap-up to thank our partners for making this happen. And it is true what is written in the banner behind us. What is written in the banner behind us? It's not behind us, is it?
It's in front of us.
It's actually in front of us, the banner in front of us, which is together we are the solution to the climate crisis. And the together has to be definitely together and not apart. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's now focus on what's going on in the negotiations here. We have a special focus on gender, which was one of the themes today at the final day here for us. So what is happening, what is not happening, what needs to happen? And with us to discuss these very important topics, we have two women. We have Menka Goundan, Program Director at the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women. And Amelia Nairoba, Ministry of Women, Children and Social Protection, Fiji. Terrific to have both of you here. So Menka, you are a feminist researcher, human rights activist, and development program specialist from Fiji. So what are your reflections from the COP so far?
My reflections from COP so far is, well, I think we still have a long way to go when it comes to including gender in the way that we would like to as gender people and as feminists at COP. We still need to have the language around intersectionality in our conversations like health. We also still need to have sexual and reproductive health and rights. We still need to integrate what we have in terms of other commitments like the Generation Equality Forum, etc., into the language we have here in the UNFCCC space. So there still needs to be synergies around what is happening in the what we call the mainstream gender space, be it the Commission on the Status of Women or be it within the Beijing Platform for Action conversations that are also happening right now. So that synergy needs to come. So we are not all there in terms of the language and text when it comes to gender. We are all not there when it comes to being diverse and inclusive in the adaptation conversations as well.
Well, thank you very much, Menka. Amelia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Basically for us at the Department for Women, we're grateful to be here as a national means of machinery, basically to understand what actually happens at this climate global space, and not only having the language but also having our climate change division officers together with us. We get to know what are the gender intersectionalities. If you're not in the room, they're able to have the gender perspective. So that's really important of where we're coming from in terms of having our institutional capacity development for all government officials in whatever space that they are in. They're able to have the gender lenses to be able to identify what are the intersectionalities, identify the needs and concerns of women and girls on the ground. Even if you're not in the room, they're able to identify those languages around it as well. So we'll be able to, provide that policy advice, the right interventions that needs to happen in terms of addressing the challenges and the impacts of women and girls when it comes to climate change and disaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. Question to both of you. We know that women and youth and children are the ones that are hit the hardest when it comes to climate change already, and it's just going to get worse. So what would you primarily want to focus on? Where do we need to be laser sharp to make this not be such a big difference when it comes to who's hit the hardest? Menka.
This is where intersectionality and the discourse on intersectionality is important within the climate conversation. To recognize women, children, young people, and then the other identities that these groups hold as well. So you can be a woman, but you can also be an indigenous person. You can be a woman, you can also be a woman with disability. You can be a woman, you can be a young woman or an older woman. And the way you experience climate change as a person depends on these different identities that you have. And that is why the push to have intersectionality included in adaptation language, in the Lima work program, within the gender action plan conversations, and in the global goal for adaptation, those things are hence important. And like you said, the disproportionate experience of women and young people and children is, the greatest in some of the ground zones that we have. And if we see the IPPC report for this year, we know that some of the hardest hit places belong in Asian Pacific. And hence, the women, children, young people from these countries are at the forefront, and having their voices in such spaces recognized, given their vast intersectionalities, is important.
Thank you very much, Menka. So, Amelia, can you run by us what is the situation for women and children when it comes to climate change in Fiji?
Yeah, thank you. Basically, for us in Fiji, incidences of gender-based violence that's exacerbate during climate change disasters. We've been having we reported in our Fiji country gender assessment, the increase of cases of rape and incest that has been happening, and also our women artisans, women entrepreneurs around the country, their livelihoods are affected as well. What resilient programs are we have to map out as well amongst government officials and development partners to be able to address that issue as well, and also having the impacts in the sexual reproductive health and rights, the health rights, the health situations in communities and villages have been affected, accessibility of health services during disaster and climate crisis. Those are some of the things that we've seen has been an issue, which is why, and we're grateful for UN Women who have, through their Women Resilience to Disaster program, WRD, that we're able to map out and provide spaces for them to be able to raise their concerns, what are the challenges, and see what avenues we'll be able to come up with across government and also with development partners and stakeholders, and ensure that there's support, its accessibility with our women, persons living disabilities, women and children, and also the most vulnerable group in our communities who are able to be provided that support during a climate crisis. Yeah.
So, Amelia, these are major effects in so many areas of society. So, mitigation here, how do we address it's very disparate areas that the climate change affect gender and youth. So, how do we focus the mitigation aspects here?
Yeah, for Fiji, basically, like I mentioned earlier, with the UN Women having to provide that space, that's basically one, and also for us, with the ministry having the National Action Plan for the Prevention of Violence Against Women and Girls, the strategies and plans, and also networkings that we're doing in terms of disaster and climate crisis, that there's support that there is in addressing gender-based violence during climate crisis, and also with the forthcoming women's economic empowerment national action plan, we're also addressing in terms of the strategies and support and plans that we have for women entrepreneurs in the informal, formal sector, providing that some sort of support, and how would they be able to provide food on the table as well. And also now that we have the under gender and climate change initiatives and plans that we already have through the Climate Change Division, the National Disaster Management Office, and other stakeholders and development partners who are we working very closely. And we're grateful again, I must admit, in terms of the support of UN Women through our WRG program, that we are providing that space for our women and also mapping what are the needs are on the ground, and to be able to address these critical issues and identifying what works well and also what we need to also strengthen as well, that we our national, our government officials in a district and local levels, that we're able to identify the needs and concerns of women and girls on the ground when it comes to climate change and disaster. So probably those are some of the things that we're currently doing at the National Women's Machinery, so that we also identifying the intersectionalities, as Menka mentioned, and also mitigate in terms of what are strategies that we need to do that's more resilient and inclusive, and identifying the needs on the ground, and they're addressed accordingly as well.
Thank you, Amelia. So Menka, Amelia, you work with UN Women. You've highlighted the collaboration here. So in terms of accumulating knowledge from different parts of the world, I mean, the way you work with these topics, how is this knowledge fed into the UN Women's system? Because there is a lot of learnings to be done from the work that is being done in different areas in different countries, correct? Yeah. So how is this sharing of, if I might say, success stories? How do you share these findings and these learnings?
So for us at the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, we do collaborate with the UN Women's Asia Pacific office, and also beyond in the global space as well. So some of these stories come in the form of statements that we have made in various intergovernmental spaces. The others come in the form of call to actions from various multi-stakeholder dialogues that we have hosted. We just recently, in the build-up to COP29, hosted in collaboration with UN Women, UNDP, UNFPA and UNEP, hosted a multi-stakeholder dialogue in which Fiji was also represented across Asian Pacific. Stakeholders from various entities came together to do a call to action that would help them frame some of the recommendations that we want to give out here in the interlinkage of gender action, gender equality and climate action rather. So those are some examples where we bring together and convene with different stakeholders to ensure that gender equality is within the climate spaces across the Asian Pacific region.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Amelia, and thank you, Amelia and Menka, for your brilliant work here, and truly inspiring to hear what you're doing in this field. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. So, how can these effects be mitigated even more? And we're going to talk about this even more in the next session.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Historic record-breaking drought.
Record-breaking temperature.
116 degrees. 130 degrees.
140 degrees. Do I hear 145 degrees?
Now researchers say there may be a new way to inform the public.
The program was particularly effective at changing the views of politically conservative parents.
Sono Sara. I'm Taylor. Soy Esteban. Je suis Noam. I'm Dylan Johnny.
It's all about to who?
With the very special weather report. From up there to down here, everything is crazy. Let's look at the forecast for 2050.
Global initiative, they're calling it Weather Kids.
To mobilize climate action for future generations.
Cette campagne est diffusée dans plus de 80 pays.
Incroyable, non? En Belgique, sera la même que celle qu'on retrouve aujourd'hui.
Heat waves will affect 94% of children, making outdoor kids a thing of the past. Disasters cost taxpayers almost $6 trillion. My parents hate taxes, but don't worry, there's still a chance of clear skies.
With a special forecast just like this, it's looking ahead to what our planet might look like in the year 2050.
I made the pledge today, and I encourage our viewers to do the same.
For my daughter Charlotte, thinking about what action we need to take to protect the planet, she says to me, Mummy, is the planet going to be okay? And I want to say to her, yes. So
This is such an excellent initiative to communicate climate change.
And to raise awareness and encourage climate action worldwide.
If there's one thing we can all agree on, is that we want a better future for our kids.
We'll keep you posted as we check if adults stop wasting time and fix this totally solvable problem. Because it's not just a weather report to us, it's our future. Nostro futuro. It's our future.
Oh, she had me at the first word.
So that was Weather Kids, and you've been seeing these reports, I think, almost daily later on in the shows here at We Don't Have Time. And we're really happy to learn more about this campaign, and also the fact that it's won 3 of the prestigious Gold Anthem Awards. So that's a really big congratulations to the Weather Kids and to the whole team behind this campaign. And I think what we're going to do now is we're going to actually meet one of the masterminds behind the Weather Kids.
We are indeed. Wonderful to have you with us, Bas Paldi. I see you. You're with us on Zoom. And you are, for those who do not know you, you are Chief Creative Officer at UNDP. So how are you today, Boaz?
I'm very well. It's so nice to be with you and Nick in the studio. I'm sorry I'm not there in person.
Yeah,
well,
we're missing you. We're missing you indeed. So this has been a great success, this campaign, and we've been getting these special weather reports on every one of our shows here during the COP, and people might want to know more about how did it all start. Please tell us about the campaign. How do you got it going?
Sure. The brief was to try and have a campaign around the climate emergency that encourages climate action, which is a very broad brief. We saw studies coming in from around the world, from academics, from other sources, that showed us that the best way to try and encourage people to take climate action is to remind us of our children. It's to remind us of the next generations. And so we leaned into that issue. The other thing that we observed is that climate used to be, we used to talk about the weather because we had nothing better to talk about. It's nice outside, it's not nice outside, but now it's breaking news every day. It's in our faces. We saw what happened in Spain a few weeks ago. We've seen what happened with the hurricanes in September in the States. It's really breaking news constantly. So we thought we'd combine the two ideas. And what we came up with was the Weather Kids, which is essentially kind of 10-year-old kids describing the weather according to IPCC data of when they're adults. And that's the story of the Weather Kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so strong, as everybody gets so moved when you show it to them the first time. And Nick mentioned that you just won 3 Golden Anthem Awards. Could you please share with us, what does that entail?
So the Anthem Awards are the Impact Awards of the Webby Awards in the United States. They're very prestigious. We're very, very excited that we were honored with 3 gold wins. We had an incredible PR mechanism behind this campaign with the ICCO that allowed us to have an incredible earned media aspect of it, and we won for that. We also won for the best campaign, non-for-profit. And so it's really kind of like it's really the industry taking notice and saying that this is a good campaign, and we're extremely proud of that. It took an army to do this. We had so many partners across the world. Our creative partners, Activista in Los Angeles. We had our production partners, Artery here in New York. So many other partners. Of course, We Don't Have Time helped us with outreach tremendously. So we're this is an award that was won by all partners. It's really a testament to the work that's been done through collaboration on this campaign.
Well, Boaz, you were also one of the creators of the famous Don't Choose Extinction campaign with Frankie the dinosaur, seen by billions around the world. Very successful campaign too. So have you got some other wonderful ideas cooking in the creative pot at UNDP in New York right now that might be coming our way?
Nick, the issue is that we need to reach audiences, right? We need to find ways to break through the noise. We need to find ways to really find ways that will resonate with the audience that we're talking to. We, traditionally at the UN may have expected the audiences to come to us, but we need to go to the audiences, and we need to go with messages that will somehow land. And so kind of like the dinosaur obviously landed because we all like to see dinosaur films, and so I think the Weather Kids landed because we all somehow have kids in our lives. So we'll continue trying to find ways to engage with a larger audience, but it's also really important that we think about the narrative, that the narrative is a positive narrative. It's a narrative of hope. It's a narrative that this can be done, that the transition will happen, that we will succeed and we will make it and we will create a better world.
Thank you, Boaz. I have a follow-up question on the Weather Kids campaign, because I'm curious, apart from the awards, how has the response been globally? I mean, how many countries did you have in the campaign again?
We launched in 92 countries on a single
92.
day.
92.
Since then, we've launched in a few more. The response has been incredible. We've really reached an enormous amount of people. And one of the interesting phenomena of the campaign was, you saw it in the video, but I'll just highlight it, is that we were able to reach in a way across the aisle. In 95% positive sentiment for the campaign across media. That means exactly that. It means Fox News and CNN. It means that we somehow reached in a highly divided world on an issue that really is so makes so many divisions. In a way, we managed to talk to everyone, and that's really an incredible testament to the idea of the campaign, and to the script writing of the campaign, and to the production of the campaign and how we made it, that we were able to do that. And I think that's one of the things that I love most about this campaign, that we didn't only talk to the converted, we didn't only talk to the people that was easiest to talk to, but we tried to talk to as many as possible.
Okay.
So Boaz, being such a brilliant climate communicator, and we have many viewers here, for people that could be in a school setting or other journalists watching this, what would be your best sort of pieces of advice to reach audiences? You mentioned having something, when the children, of course, everybody has a child in one aspect or another in their lives, and the dinosaurs we all love. But any overarching themes or thoughts that people could bring with them from the expert?
I think we don't have time. We're doing this so well. I mean, you guys know better than me, but positive messages, reinforcing the can-do spirit, reinforcing the fact that this can be done. Even through this process of COP, it's important to have these processes. It's important to keep moving forward, one step after the other, one foot in front of the other. We will keep on doing this until we win, and that's the message that I think will resonate. I think we need to have a message of hope out there. The doom and gloom is redundant. We need to move. We all know that there's a danger. We just need to get it done now.
And I was just going to say, and we also, I mean, it has to be creative, right? So it has to surprise or entertain or, touch the heart, or it has to do something more than just the message. You have to have a feeling or a response to it that's semi-universal. So then you've got a global campaign, Always tricky with global campaigns in the UN. Sometimes it's easier to do local campaigns with the local culture, but getting a global one doing really well. So well done for that with both these two campaigns and many others. I think we're going to have to move on here, Katarina.
Yes, we will. I'm just curious. Well, I'm just not curious. I don't have an extra question. I'm just saying I'm excited to see what next is coming out from your creative mind. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, and good luck with everything going on there.
Thank you so much, Bas
Thanks,
Paldi.
Boaz.
Thank you.
Great. So we're coming towards the end of our broadcast from COP29 in Baku on the wonderful Caspian Sea. And we're just extending our wrap-up a little bit right now. And I'm delighted to have journalists with me and also experts who've been following some of these negotiations, which are now, of course, as usual, at a critical moment, hanging on a knife edge, and all the other cliches that we want to constantly bring along at COPs. But let me just say who we've got here right now, because we've got Rob Moore, Associate Director, Public Banks and Development, E3G. Cosima Cassel, Program Lead, E3G. Doesn't say what program you're leading, but that's okay. We might get to that. Bernhard Pötter, who's Editorial Director of Climate.Table and a very distinguished German journalist covering climate change for a long time. And Megan Rowling, Editor of Climate Home News, and also before at Reuters. Again, another distinguished journalist, having covered these topics for many, many years. Let's go to the nitty-gritty right now. The kind of thing that everyone's waiting to find out is either going to land, not land, or somewhere in between, sort of semi-land, which is finance. Could you maybe I can ask first, where do you think we are with this, Rob? What's happening?
Sure. Can I just check the microphone's working? Yep.
It's okay. It's just that we're not trying to blast the journalists out into the cosmos by... that's interesting. That's a whole new game I've got right now. You are perfectly clear to
Wonderful.
the audience of 2.5 million viewers watching this.
Wonderful.
Okay.
So where the climate finance discussions are, so last night the Azerbaijani presidency published a text which contained a range of options for the new global goal on climate finance, which is the goal that will replace the $100 billion climate finance goal that's agreed all the way back in 2009 for the developed countries to mobilize $100 billion per year in climate finance to developing countries by 2020. So that goal was met late, but it was met eventually. And what this goal is trying to do is to agree, following on from something that couldn't be agreed in all the way back in the Paris Agreement in 2014, how much money is going to flow from developed countries to developing countries to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. And there are a range of discussions that are going on. The two that are getting the most profile is, firstly, we can all agree how much money is needed. We know that it's in the trillions of dollars per year in overall investment. We know that the things that we need to do in order to meet that goal involve an entire systemic shift in the financial system. We also know that they need a lot more support to go to developing countries. And the two things that are being discussed in this negotiation most foremostly are, firstly, how much of that money needs to come from support. So not just your sort of general shift in the financial system, which is really important and everybody needs to do, but how much of it is going to come from international support from better off countries to worse off countries that are often more vulnerable to climate impacts.
Right.
Then secondly, there's a conversation going around who needs to pay towards meeting that goal. And this is challenging because back in 1992, when the UN Convention was set, there was a subset of countries that were listed as needing to pay towards that goal. And so you'll have probably heard, if you've been covering this conference, lots of discussion around who the contributor base is and who's responsible for paying. So what we have seen is a text issued by the presidency which is intended at this stage in the conference, and I led the climate finance team during the UK's COP26 presidency, so I've been in the presidency's seat before. And it outlined a series of proposals which we were hoping, I think, for a bridging proposal from the presidency. So you have this immense need in developing countries, and this real challenge in developed countries to get the amount of money that is needed to meet those needs. And actually what we saw was a sort of, rather than seeing a proposal that was a compromise position, was very much a...
I have to rush you a bit.
one side or the other. And so what we need to see in the rooms now is countries move together to try and reach an agreement in a very short space of time on a very high political issue that has a lot of money involved in it. And that's going to be the challenge over the next few days of this COP.
So, are you following finance, or you're following something else, Cosima?
So I'm following the entire COP.
Yeah,
I'm program lead for climate diplomacy.
Do you think the language is a bit unfortunate, that some have to pay others, because people go, well, this moment we don't have much money at home, whereas actually some people would argue that actually it's not charity, right? It's actually that we need every country on board to actually deal with climate change, and some of the developing countries need support to move further and faster, and we won't solve climate change unless they can do that, right? And some would also go to the further edge and say, well, actually, the developed world has piled up a lot of climate debts, by burning fossil fuels, damaging the developing world, and they need to be supported with dealing with that as well. So is language very explosive here between the different groups? Do you think language is important in these discussions?
Yeah, language is definitely important, and I think the key to the Paris Agreement is based on the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities. So it accepts that some countries have more responsibility for historical emissions than others, and also more means to pay than others. What we're trying to do here at COP29 is find a solution where which is equitable, where the countries that can pay and deliver the climate protection and the climate action for the most vulnerable.
Okay, Megan. We've all been around this process for a long time, some of us even longer than COP26 in Glasgow, can you believe? And I see before this COP, there was an attempt by the European Union to bring in some of the bigger, rapidly developing economies like China to actually also step up to the mark with payments. And I saw something just the other day that seemed to say that China had now exceeded the historical emissions of the EU. But this process, as you rightly point out, there's still this old-fashioned language about how you divide up the world. It's a world from 20-odd years ago, 30-odd years ago. We don't seem to be able to break that in terms of these debates on finance.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most difficult debates that's going on here, because I think there is a general understanding that the world isn't the same place, and that, you know, emissions of emerging economies have grown quite exponentially. But on the other hand, there is a historical responsibility for which countries have caused climate change and grown their economies as a result of burning fossil fuels. And so I think it's a very delicate discussion around how do you acknowledge that the modern world, the one we're living in today, has moved on, and, you know, the emissions of large developing economies are growing fast. But on the other hand, you don't forget that historically the industrialized countries do bear the biggest burden for heating up the planet. So in terms of language that we were just referring to, it's how do you find a way of expressing that in the text that isn't going to upset different parties here. And so you mentioned China. I think there's a feeling that China is putting money on the table already in terms of helping other countries, and it's happy to continue doing that, but it wants to do that on a voluntary basis, and it doesn't want to be put on an equal footing with the industrialized countries. And so it's around how do you incorporate financial contributions from large emerging economies and big emitters like China without labeling them, you know, with the same sort of responsibility as larger industrialized countries.
Yeah. Bernhard, do you get a sense that this standoff, I mean, the figure from this high-level group or whatever was what, 1.3 trillion a year or something like that? And then we've seen other reports from the Climate Policy Initiative out of London and saying that actually by 2030, global financial flows need to be 10 trillion, 12 trillion, right? So there's numbers going around that even show higher curves. Is this resolvable, if that's in the English language, between these different positions? Or do you think they'll resolve it in a fudge, you know, a kind of find a way, and then we'll have a little success at the COP? What's your instinct on this?
My instinct, yeah. There is not much more at the time of the COP, I think, than instinct, because we don't really know where we're going to land tomorrow or in 1 or 2 days or 3 days, whatever. I think about the figures, about the numbers. One should not be afraid of these numbers. People are tossing around these trillions, and then people say, oh, trillions will never make it, right? So I think one has to distinguish what are we talking about, where does the money come from, and where does it go? A lot of that is investment money. So it's not like if you go to any country, any industrialized country with tight budgets now, and if you talk about trillions, everybody will shy away and say there's no way in doing this, right? So you have to break it down and say how much of that we have the 100 billion now, or the promise of the 100 billion. So how much of that is going to be taxpayers' money? How much public money is going into that? How about private money? So you have to really break it down into what is the money, where does it come from, and also where does it go? And there's a huge difference. A lot of that money is already flowing. It's already going into places like China.
Infrastructure and things like that. Right. It just needs a little bit of extra money to green it.
And a lot of these countries, even a lot of the developing countries, pay a lot of their own money into this, right? It's not like everything's coming from the global north. So you have to kind of break it down. And once you break it down, it's still a huge task. One has to say that. If you come from any country with a tight budget, but it's doable, especially if you think of what other money we are spending on, right? Fossil fuel subsidies, 7 trillion, I think, a year, right? So spending on defense, well, that might be also a problem. So there's a lot of money out there, and I think it's true. And on the other hand, you see also a movement in how to get the money in, right? Lula and the G20 summit just came up with this billionaires tax, right? I think there are a lot of people in the industrialized country who would agree that that might be a good idea, right? So it's not like, I think one has to really look closely at what kind of money is this, where is it going, where is it coming from, and maybe we can change something in our own countries and our own budget to make it better and fairer world also, right? By doing this.
Yes. Because for a lot of countries in Africa, the loans that they get are sort of astronomical in comparison to what we might take as a loan from our local bank to extend the dog kennel or something, you know. It's really, really important. Look, it's a COP. And have we heard anything at this COP where we've gone, wow? Have we heard anything in announcements or something else where we said, oh, there's something a bit new here, or something's moving, or wow, I'm surprised? You put an expression on your face that would look positive.
Yeah, I mean, I would say one big positive that we've seen at this COP was the UK's announcements of its NDC. So they have committed to an 81% reduction on 1990 levels in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And this is in line with 1.5 degrees. This is exactly what we need to be seeing, more nationally determined contributions. So these are the kind of national climate action plans that every country needs to submit before February 2025. And by announcing early, the UK has kind of set the bar of what is needed. We're waiting for the follow-up kind of detailed plans of what goes into that. But this is based on kind of independent climate change committee recommendations, which if the UK comes forward with plans which are kind of economy-wide across sectors, then this will be a really great sign and kind of a model for others to follow. We've also seen a couple of other NDC submissions in the past couple of weeks, one before COP, that was the UAE, and then one during, which was Brazil. So these are actual submissions.
Everyone seems very excited about the Brazilian one as well. I don't know. Bernhard's not too excited, but...
you asked for a wow moment, and I would say, well, this is a COP, right? You don't, very, very seldom you have wow moments at COP. At least I have had over the last 15 years, maybe Paris, but so I'm not so much into, I'm looking every day for a wow moment. I would be happy if there was a that's okay moment at the end, right? Because normally everything builds up to this last night, these last 2 nights, and then you come out with something where most people are unhappy with. But that's the deal of a compromise, right? So it is, in a way, the process is much too slow and much too not enough for the problems we're facing out there, right? I think it's been like that for 29 years now, and there's no denying that. So we are not living up to the task of climate change with this process. But on the other hand, that's the only thing we got. So, and somebody else said the other day, look at what multilateralism is in which stage is it now. This is one of the very few processes that really is kind of working, at least, and kind of delivering. If you look at the WTO, nothing's happening, right? So let's not forget that this is challenging environment out there, and the word streets meaning.
No, fair enough. I mean, but it's a very challenging environment out there. But the science tells us we need to halve emissions by 2030, and what we're going to get here is not going to do that. So then where do we look? Do we kick it down the road to Brazil? Lots of people said even before this COP, this one, it's really going to be Brazil. I'm thinking, yeah, but then that's just 4 years to halving emissions by 2030. Sorry, I'll come to Megan in a second. Rob, you want to say something on this?
Yeah, I think one thing that I do want to say, one thing that this COP has been, I think, is a bit of a reality check on the financing side of things. So there is so much goodwill in the negotiations to find an outcome that can work for everyone. There is also, I think, a realization of the scale of the challenge. And I think, it took us, pointing to the points around multilateralism, it took us so much time to get the Paris Agreement. And we know that there are lots of challenges to multilateralism, and we know that the outcome of this COP is unlikely to respond to the enormity of the needs facing developing countries. So how can we do as much as we can this COP and then create a pathway forward? And that goes for both ambition and finance. And I don't think that's necessarily a fudge. I think it could be construed as a fudge, but it's an acknowledgement that we're not where we need to be. And so how do we create a pathway to where we need to be? And not in a woolly way, not in a way that is, often used by bureaucrats and diplomats, but really, how do we create a pathway to where we need to get to? And I think we're going to need to enter the last few days of these discussions with that in mind. So how do we hand over to Brazil at least a platform that it can take forward, that it can accelerate, so we don't lose 4 years. Maybe we don't get as much this year as we need to, but we really accelerate, and we see it as a wake-up call for those that are able to.
Okay, Megan?
Yeah, exactly. It's a process that builds every year on what happened in the years before and is incremental in taking forward the progress. And the importance of the finance at this COP is that it will provide more momentum and incentives for ambition in the national climate plans that are supposed to be landing next year. But looking even beyond Belém, experts say that this next round of national climate plans, that won't add up either. Most likely to the level, the 45% reduction in emissions that we need to see by 2030, to have a chance of keeping warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But you don't give up, right? You don't get to Belém and say, oh, well, it looks like we're not going to have enough emissions cuts by 2030, so we just abandon the whole thing. The Paris Agreement was done in such a way that there's always a next step and you can build on what's happened before. And, it may seem crazy to people on the outside that we come here every year and we keep having these discussions and it always seems like it's never enough. But when people talk to me in that way, I say to them, well, you can't just look at it that way. You have to ask yourself, what would the world be like if we didn't have this process? We would be looking at global warming of a much higher amount, and damage that would be coming from that would be much bigger.
I accept that point, but I think there has to be something added to this. I don't want to take away from the COP, but I feel maybe... So Mark Watts of the C40 Cities Network was on our show, and I asked him a little bit about this, and he said what the cities want is that every year, governments come every year and say what they did in terms of cutting emissions, supplying finance and building resilience in the last 12 months, and what their business plan, you might say, is for the next 12 months. So there's kind of constant accountability about what you promised you're going to do, rather than waiting for stock takes every, is it 5 years or whatever, yeah? So something a bit different that's a bit more nimble, and you say, okay, we cut emissions by this much, or yeah, we're a bit off target right now, but we're going to try, a bit like what they do in the UK, right, with the Climate Act, where you keep recalibrating. Maybe that's where he got the idea from. Keep recalibrating where you are on this path of your NDC.
I think it's a perfect example with the UK and the Climate Change Act to see why it does not work here.
Okay.
Because the UK is a nation, is a country, right? It's a national country. You have a parliament, and everything's fine. If you have a majority in parliament, you can change things. Here, you have 197, 98 countries, and you have to agree on everything. So these things, I mean, people can come up with a lot of good ideas how to make things easier and to make how to work. But even if you have one, two, or one important country, everything grinds to a halt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the process, and one has to. I would rather say, and people have been quite inventive, I think, over the last decades to kind of build things around the process when it's too slow, right?
Mm-hmm.
The buildup of renewables in the real world was not created here.
Mm-hmm.
It was because the guardrails were created here, and then capitalism kicked in, if you like it or not, right? And so I think that is the only way forward, instead of thinking here, well, in an ideal world, we would do this and we would do that. In an ideal world, we would have majority vote here, and things would go really, really fast, right? If you have 140 countries in Dubai who wanted to have something like phase out fossil fuels, and you would have a simple majority, we would have that, but we don't.
So, you mentioned the UK's NDC. Ed Miliband's the minister responsible, Secretary of State responsible for climate change, said in his remarks at a methane meeting that the UK won't be able to achieve the 81% unless they also act on methane. And I only bring up methane as either journalists or kind of people in the rooms observing. But it seems to me in the last 2 years, the issue of methane has suddenly gone like that, right? Because it's a short-lived climate pollutant. It hangs around for, not that long. Maybe it's 90 times more polluting, or 80. We had Sir David King, the former chief scientist of the UK, saying it was 120 times. I mean, whatever is big in terms of heating. And I get the feeling that some governments are so nervous about actually achieving the halving of emissions that they see methane, a sprint on methane up to 2030, as a possibility of getting somewhere closer to that halving of emissions. Do you get that sense? Anybody watching this methane story evolve or not?
I mean, I think we need action on methane to reduce those emissions. It's a very powerful greenhouse gas, but we also need action across the board. It can't just be action on methane.
Yeah.
It needs to be action.
One accepts that, yeah. It's just that in the past, methane it only gets 2% of climate finance. It was kind of parked over here in some institutions of the UN, interested. But now it seems to be bursting out a bit into a big policy decision.
I think there's a pledge, a global methane pledge, to cut methane emissions. I think it's 30% by 2030.
Yeah.
But I think methane's an interesting example of where the private sector could actually do a lot more, because the oil and gas industry knows how to reduce methane emissions from oil and gas production
And it doesn't really cost them anything either, because they could use the methane.
It doesn't cost them anything, exactly. And so this is somewhere where I think governments could really try and put pressure on the private sector to step up and do a lot more. And these companies are not short of money. They don't need funding from here, unlike many vulnerable communities and people.
I'm being told, by the way, that we're just getting over the line. So sorry, guys, I'm going to take another minute and a half. I do apologise. But any last-minute closing points as we head towards this, which in the short time of 30 minutes, we've heard about the finance, we've heard about the NDCs we've heard so far. We talked a little bit about, what would we do with the COP, because we know there was a paper a few days ago which got really negative press. And I mean negative press not just from the press, but almost from everybody else, but by some smart people. So we've got 2030 coming. So there is a bit of nervousness, I think, in the world on this, among all the other issues out there. Anybody here optimistic we're going to hit our targets? Anybody think we will?
Which targets? The 2030 targets?
2030 and 2050. That was a no?
No, I'm not optimistic.
Okay.
On the 2030, I'm not optimistic.
Okay.
I'm also not optimistic on 2030, but I think if there's a sea change of recognition that if we don't act faster, we will be in great trouble, then maybe by 2050 we will have got our act together.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're in a very difficult situation right now, but this is where we really need to see leadership. With Brazil coming in to take over the COP30 presidency, we need to see that drive on sectoral ambition, on finance, on subnationals, empowering subnationals to take action. And if we see those things, and also kind of more regular review moments, as you mentioned, that can help us increase ambition from where we are and hopefully get closer to that target.
I think you're hearing consensus 2050 looks better, but less time to lose. So.
Yeah. I'm sorry, guys, we run out of time. It goes so damn quickly, but this was such an interesting conversation, and I'm not sure that any other TV channel has had this kind of conversation. And I think the audience will have learnt a little bit about, from your intelligence, how complicated this damn thing is. And shifting 190 countries from over 2 centuries of fossil fuel dominated development is far from easy, but we need to try. Great, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
And now it's our great pleasure to welcome to the studio Pippa Heylings, Member of Parliament, UK House of Commons.
Yeah.
Great to have you with us, Pippa.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, it's super. Very nice of you, Pippa. So, Pippa, we're just wrapping up the show now, and maybe this is something that we can, in a sense, look forward to, that you're going to be informing us about and informing the audience. You're working on a climate and nature bill, is that correct? And what is this about, and what does it stand to achieve?
Well, really it's about bringing hope. So in the UK, there was groundbreaking progress with the Climate Change Act that we've heard about in 2008. And that's been used as an example all around the world. What we now need to do is recognise that as we haven't moved fast enough on reducing, our carbon emissions, climate change is now the greatest threat to nature, to wildlife at land and at sea. And at the same time, when that's getting destroyed, we're losing the carbon sink, the natural ability to help us to fight climate change, as well as adapt to the climate shocks that we can't avoid, which is like flooding, heat waves and storms, coastal erosion, sea level rise. Nature provides us natural defences to that. So what we have to do with a Climate and Nature Act is make sure that our government responds to both at the same time, both the need to reduce our carbon emissions and to recover nature.
Right, because in a sense they're both at risk at the same time, but they're mutually reinforcing in terms of opportunities for solutions. So you're kind of fighting with one hand behind your back if you just take the climate angle and forget about the nature one, and the hands both come out with the act, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you find is people just see these as naturally things that should be happening together. It's common sense.
Yeah.
Yet we've got conventions, the UN conventions.
Yeah.
One is on nature and biodiversity, one is on climate change. Finally, they've admitted and recognised that we've got to work on these both together. And so what we need to do at home is to be able to bring those together.
Yeah. So I think it's good, because it was always recognised in the Paris Agreement that there's no way you could achieve net zero without restoring nature, making sure and looking after nature you have and restoring the nature you've lost, because it is both a technological challenge, is cutting the emissions, but also a nature story as well, because nature, absorbs the emissions. So the whole Paris Agreement is about restoring the balance of our planet to what it was before the Industrial Revolution, in a post-industrial setting, as it were. And so it's, how are you going to pilot this act through the House of Commons?
So it's coming through a private member's bill. So we've got the Liberal Democrats. So we have an MP, Ros Savage, who is putting this forward. Backbenchers get the chance to, through a ballot, to put a piece of legislation.
Yep.
So this is coming in January. What it means is there has to be more than 120 MPs in the room who will support this legislation. It's on a Friday when normally MPs are back in their constituencies, you know, representing and working with local people. So it's asking them to go back to Parliament, be in the room to get the second reading of this piece of legislation through.
Right.
And if we get it through, that means that then we would be able in April to have a much deeper piece of work on this primary legislation.
Right.
And what it means is really people already are concerned about nature. They're backing this in their hordes. So we've got local councils backing it, we've got cross-party support, young people. So they're all saying, I want my MP to be there. I want you to go back to Parliament, make sure that this gets past its second reading.
And how will you, I mean, if it does go through and it does succeed, and perhaps even if it didn't succeed, you're putting down a marker, right, in the UK on this. What about the rest of the world? Could they be inspired by this? Could be something that you could then bring, the UK government could bring back to a COP in the future and start floating this idea as a more general concept? You know?
So like I was saying, the Climate Change Act in 2008 was groundbreaking and many countries followed that.
Yeah.
I think this could bring the hope we need right now because nature is in crisis as well at the same time. And many of the efforts now to move forward and accelerate on carbon emissions technology could actually impact nature. So we've got to make sure that we do this thinking at both at the same time.
Right.
So we've got to keep the Amazon forest as the lungs of the planet. And at the moment, the Brazilian part looks as if it's tipping over into being an emitter rather than a sponge that soaks up that carbon, which tips us into all sorts of catastrophic scenarios.
Right.
So across the world, we could have climate and nature acts that are looking at both of these together. But I have to say, I haven't worked in many countries, and many of them have got more biodiverse countries and landscapes than we have. They've looked after their nature far better than we have in our country. So we're actually learning from them. But perhaps this legislative approach is one thing that we could share.
Yes. So sorry, no, you carry on.
So Pippa, I watched you watch from the stands here before you entered, and I'm curious because you radiate optimism, and which we really need. And the last question the former panel got was about, do you really think we will be able to meet the 2030 goals and the 2050 goals? So I'm a bit curious in relation to this, the work you're doing. What are your thoughts on what is your answer to this?
So I work a lot with young people as well, and they have climate anxiety. And that's because you know, they're just really worried about their futures much more than other generations are. And the main reason they're worried is that they don't feel that people are listening to them, decision makers, and that they're not making the right decisions. So it's agency. So basically, I'm full of an optimism that we're bringing young people in, we're bringing local groups, local councils in. That's the way we broke the impasse before Paris. This is the way we're going to break it now through a Climate and Nature Act, which empowers and motivates everyone again.
Absolutely. Yeah, getting people back into the game at all levels is really important. And then they can also put pressure on their governments, because in the end, the governments are voted in by the people, and whether it be communities, whether it be cities, whether it be the private sector, they all give the governments a license to operate, right? And the governments then know that these groups have their back as well, the government's back to go out and make some tough decisions. I just get the feeling right now we're living in a kind of post-Second World War world where everyone thinks that everything has to be stuck in aspic, right, and preserved, and there aren't any tough decisions to make anymore, you know? There are tough choices to be made, and those choices are about the future of our children, right? And they have to be, we have to be courageous about that.
So I just think we've gone through big change in our country with a change of government. We've never had so many brand new MPs all at once in one general election. And that in part was a rejection of what had been happening with the previous government, but I do know that was also in favour of a different future.
Yeah.
So some have called that almost a climate election. There were many, many people who were voting tactically, one for how we get that change in government, but also, is this the best person to represent me, to stop the rowing back? There'd been a breaking of the political consensus around climate change in our country.
Yes.
And polling showed people weren't in favour of that. So we can get that change. We can't have things in aspic, and we just need to take people's hearts and minds with us.
Yeah, I mean, the previous government did something so stupid, which was to make the price of the latest round of wind projects in the North Sea, which has been a huge success in the UK, so cheap was the price that nobody could afford.
So,
no wind
so how many offers did we get?
Yeah,
Zero.
And now in the latest round, we've even got ones that are going tethered wind turbines that can go much further at sea.
But Nick, what it means is that we've lost time.
Yeah.
So we have to go even faster and further now because we've gone backwards. So I'm optimistic, but it means absolutely we've got to do everything, bring everybody with us and do as much as we can. But we can't only go for energy solution. So this is what we would say to the Labour government as well. We've got to make sure this is across all sectors.
Yes.
And we've got to bring nature on board.
That's right. It's the whole economy. The whole economy. Yeah. Pippa, thanks so much. We run out of time, but lovely to see you, and really best of luck with this private members bill, and hope it succeeds. And we'll certainly, if you keep in contact with us, we'll certainly be help to promote it a little bit through We Don't Have Time.
Well, that'd be fantastic.
And we're happy to lend our social media power to it, and let's see what we can do.
Thank you. There's so many campaign groups, 0 Hour, others behind us on this. So amplifying that voice will be fantastic.
Yeah, super. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now let's move on. And now let's check in with our studios in Stockholm and in Kenya. And let's start with Stockholm.
Hello, Baku.
Hello, hello.
This is Stockholm.
Good.
Now I have Ingmar here with me.
Excellent. So we have Christina Karlström and Ingmar Rentzhog. Ingmar, what's weird? You were just here, and now you're in Sweden, but we're happy to see you anyhow. So Nick, you have some questions for the group here,
so don't get rid of me.
No, that's right. You're well, you were here in Baku, and now you're here in Stockholm. You'll be on the moon next, Ingmar. You're moving around so much. So, Ingmar, Christina, you've been working hard from a distance. Ingmar was also working hard close up for most of the time in this COP29. But today, for example, let's think about today. Have you had any time to reflect on what's happened today and what's happened generally with the COP?
Yes, my first reflection of today is about the creativity and climate session. And it's also very much talking about how do we create that image of where we want to go, and how can we use art, culture, etc. to get that image alive. And I used to go to the Stockholm School of Economics, and we had Emma here from them, and they have now they have literature and art as subjects, as well as global challenges. So I think this is really crucial to give those people who are going to be decision makers in the future opening up to other visions than just money. So that's really important, and to be able to have an image of where we're going.
Chris, can I just say, Christina, thank you so much for explaining that, because I have to say, when that lady came on, I wasn't quite sure what she was about, because I don't think the script I had was really reflecting that point. So that's really super that you did that and cleared that up. Thank you.
Thank you. So Ingmar, over to you. What has it been like today to watch the broadcast from Stockholm and not being here?
To be honest, for the first time, I had the pleasure to watch it from the beginning to the end. And it's great. I like it. So good job in Baku. It was a couple of sessions that I thought were extra interesting today. Sir David King, that were very I mean, he gave the hard facts. He also embraced the Buy More Time campaign, and we don't have time in general, and was very clear on that we need to do both. We need to phase out fossil fuel, and we also need to fix the methane problem. It's not either or, it's both. And the other reflection I have were this creativity, because that session were super interesting. Because we have the solutions, we know the problem. We need a lot of money, yes, but we need to reach people's heart and minds, and creativity is the way to do it. So we need to become much better on how we can get people engaged in climate, and it's not easy to do that, because if you're talking too much about the problem, you can get the reaction that Peter Stormer described his youngest daughter, that are terrified for the future and don't do anything because it's just too hard. On the other hand, if you just say how positive everything will be, you don't mobilize people either. So we need to find that spot of facing the reality, but also giving a way out of that reality. And I believe that the only way out of the reality we are in currently is to get together with like-minded people. That's how we are going both to survive the mess we are in, but also how we're going to get it out from there. And that is what COP meetings are all about. I mean, the negotiations, 200 countries agreeing on anything, that's a miracle. But that 50,000 leaders from all countries on this planet are meeting in 2 weeks, that is going to have an effect. We just need to figure out how we can amplify that effect so that it really matters today, not tomorrow. And lastly, a reflection I would like to just give, and that's part of the reality check. And that is if we don't hit the 2030 target, will we make the 2050 target? I think that is unfortunately maybe a false question, because the problem, I mean, Jon Rockström has put it out very clearly. If we don't hit the 2030 target, or at least quite near it, we are risking of losing everything, and that will make 2050 target impossible to reach. And I feel like a little bit denialism about that at COP, actually. It's not relevant. We need to fix the near-time target. Otherwise, we will also lose the long target. But we should, of course, not skip everything that we need to do in the long run. We need to both win the marathon and the sprint.
Thank you very much, Ingmar, and I completely agree. We need to keep the focus on the 2030, because if we keep accumulating more emissions, it's not going to work anyways if we don't meet that mark. So let's now go to Kenya, to Patrick Chiari. You've been watching the broadcast today and the other days. So what are your reflections from your account?
Hi everyone. I'm glad to be part of this COP29 at this particular year, because sometimes we don't even know about our future, but we still care for the future of the generations that will come in our life. This COP29, it was not so amusing, especially to me personally. A lot of targets, a lot of hopes that we had, they have not been realized. Today I was reading an article from one of our Kenyan media, and I noted majority of ministers or activists or the representatives of different countries from 52 countries in Africa, they felt their will or their call have not been realized. So that's a little bit sad. Apart from that, I was happy for what our CEO Ingmar said through the campaign that we are having, Buy More Time yesterday, at least there is some hope, but we would like this hope to be made reality. If it will be made reality, it will reach so many people, not only in Africa, in Global South, it might be Brazilian, where we are going COP29 next year. It might be Asia, it might be Bangladesh, it might be Indian country. So I think we need to work out. Yesterday still I listened the wrap up of our CEO, that's David. He said he feels as if he has reached to the tipping point, whether the basket is full or is not full. And I can agree what he felt is already to everyone. I listened Al Gore in previous day where he spoke, and he said we should focus more on causes rather than consequences. We ourselves, do we ask ourselves what the consequences that are ahead of us? Maybe we are the preacher of today. What about tomorrow? If they not act, who will act for our planet? Sometimes it might be sad. Sometimes it might give you hopelessness. But let's believe, like Ingmar said today, maybe we are the miracle. Let that miracle happen and we can win. A lot of speakers I listened in this COP29, there is that doubt, but let's believe we'll overcome the doubt. Maybe that's my reflection today from Kenya office and African people who I have spoken with them, who are watching our broadcasts. They are having that heavy heart in them. I think whoever listening me, whoever watching me, or whoever watching us, is the right time we are. We don't have time. We might buy time, but we need to do more so that hope can be realized. Not only for us, maybe we don't have much years to live, but how about our future generations? Thank you.
Indeed, thank you. Well spoken, Patrick, and thank you for your work in the Kenya chapter and the representing us in Africa. And of course, thank you, Christina, for the hard work you put in before the broadcast and during, and of course, Ingmar herding all of us together and bolstering us. And it takes a lot of people to do this, Nick.
It does, yeah. And just before we go to that point, I just want to say back, Patrick, it's not over yet. There's still another day or two maybe to go, and maybe these governments can find that sense of responsibility, and this is what it is. It's about responsibility to actually make the right decisions to move this thing forward. So let's keep our fingers crossed, But it does take a lot of people, right? It takes a lot of people to make these broadcasts happen, and we don't have time. I say a lot, it's not thousands, it's not a cast of thousands, it's not 1 million people, but it's a significant but relatively small number of highly talented and unbelievably patient people to actually get these broadcasts out every single day. It's like a duck, you know, you can't see all that effort under the water when the duck is on the pond, but there's a lot of ducks in our team and all paddling away under the water. So let's come on stage.
Come on, all of you.
And
join
so
us.
the audience can see us.
Join us.
Show your faces.
Yes, Sarah, Marin, Victor, Pötter.
Yep, Ulf,
Hampus.
Yep, Western,
come
Carl.
In here. Do they fit? Do they all fit in the
okay.
picture?
There we go.
This is a dream team, huh?
Ah, yeah. And Marcus is there on the magic of Zoom.
Yes, and we have Ingmar, Christina, and Patrick.
And actually,
and there's Mario.
Yeah.
And I know we were missing David.
We're missing David, just have you pointed out that we're on the magic of Zoom for them, and they're on the magic of Zoom for us. Thank you. It's a perfect circle.
And he had to leave because he had to manage the cameras. So with that said, we've had viewers from 160 countries all over the world, millions of viewers these 2 weeks. We believe and we know that we created an impact. The methane campaign that we've been running and will still be running, don't forget to sign up for it, by the way. I think it's played a part in what's happening here in the methane discussion. We don't know, but we think so. And of course, we have been sharing all this on different social media channels, and you can revisit and rewatch all of this content on wedon'thavetime.org.
Yeah, and I'd also just like to add, Katarina,
We're getting tired.
Rolfsdotter Jansen, that the number of people that Ingmar and I and maybe others met in the corridors here from Ethiopia, from many different countries, who patted us on the back and said, we watch We Don't Have Time, you're doing a great job, and a lot of my friends are watching too in Africa and other continents. So, yeah, that's really super. So thanks very much, yeah.
And again, you can find all the content on the wedon'thavetime.org, and we have this AI search engine. So just type in any topic, any speaker's name, and the AI search engine will find it. And you can watch it and rewatch it and share it.
Okay, and I think we have to, now it's getting playful, we're going to basically end this broadcast from Baku by giving the word to the youth. And
before that, we give the word to Ingmar.
Oh, do we give the word to Ingmar?
Yes, we do.
Again?
Ingmar first. It's a special greeting from the last day that he spent here at the COP.
Yep.
And after Ingmar, we have the youth.
Okay.
And that's why we're doing this all for the next generation.
As Ingmar says, read the script, Nick. Read the script.
So over and out from Baku, and thank you very much for joining and watching. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, there we go. Well done, guys.
So I'm here at the second week of COP29. It has been 2 incredible, intense weeks with so many people gathering in one place, over 50,000 from all over the world. I have very split emotions about this meeting, and I will tell you why. On one hand, it's fantastic that all the leaders in the world are gathering at one place to talk with each other, to share ideas, to push things further, and also negotiate better policy. We are 50,000 people from all parts of the world gathering in this room. And we at We Don't Have Time, we are here to amplify those voices that cannot come here. They can join us digitally through Zoom and other technology. We have our own TV studio here, as you see. And we are really pushing for a lot of those voices together with the solutions that we have here in the room. Because we really have the solutions to solve the climate crisis. We have the media center here, just next door to us, where we have 3,000 journalists from all newspapers, large newspapers in the world. During 2 weeks, they're covering exactly everything that is happening 24/7. That put climate on the agenda high up in media. You don't get that any time of the year. So that's one big part of why I'm really positive around climate meetings. And for a little bit bigger news organization, they have their own office. So UN are actually giving offices to the large media organization. And now we're going to make a visit to We Don't Have Time. This is where we are prepping all the broadcasts we're doing from it. So this is great. We really need to have climate on the agenda. And COP meetings are helping with that. Regarding the negotiations, it's tougher. We know that this helps, but it's not enough. Just today, there were actually a new report out there saying that we're still increasing the emissions. And it's not even flattening out. It's increasing every year, including the year 2024, globally. This is very, very bad news. So my split feelings with all this is that despite this bad news, people are positive here. People are fired up about amazing solutions. We're moving into clean energy. Transportation are going electrified. We have also a lot of new solutions to capture methane and other things. People are quite positive and fired up about it. The problem, it's not going to happen fast enough. And what we are not talking about here, first I thought it was very positive, but in this second week when the negotiation seems to getting stuck, etc., no one talks about Donald Trump. We have a climate denier in the world's largest economy that will leave the Paris Agreement, and this means that this will probably be the last COP with a US president. I mean, the US president is not even here, but it will be the last COP with US in the Paris Agreement until it's too late to solve the climate crisis. I don't see that mentality. Instead, I hear like, okay, it doesn't matter so much if we're not moving it too fast this COP because we will have a bigger COP in Brazil 1 year from now. But we don't have 1 year. The political climate will be worse 1 year from now. So in order to solve the climate crisis, we can't focus on all the negative stuff. That will not motivate people. But we can't only focus on the positive stuff. We need a reality check. And the reality check of the climate agenda is that it doesn't work. We're not going to halve the emission before 2030. I had this panel talk with more than 100 investors in the room. And I asked them, do you believe that we will halve the emission before 2030? 2 people raised their hand. 2 people. The Guardian did a survey among thousands of people active in the climate solution space before COP29. And they got 6%. And that was before the US election. That was before we have a climate denier in the White House. So if we don't believe we will halve the emission, we must realize that we're probably going to hit all the tipping points and most of the action will not matter enough. So what can we do? And the good news, meetings like this are actually speeding up those ideas as well. But I would like it to have more focus on what to do instead. We at Wheel of Time, we are here not only to amplify all the voices and all the solutions, we're also amplifying and launching a new campaign called Buy More Time.
The problem with carbon dioxide, when we emit it, it will go up. And it will stay up there for up to 1,000 years. Maybe we can kind of try to remove it, but it looks kind of hard to do it, very expensive. Methane is another greenhouse gas. It's a very common greenhouse gas. It's the second biggest contributor to global warming. And there's a big difference between methane and carbon dioxide. When we release this, it comes down again. On average 12 years. It's a big difference between 1,000 years, 12 years. So the solution here is that we need to stop emit methane.
We just need to make it legally binding in another structure. You don't have it on the COP meetings, but we can talk about it and we can make it happen after this COP meeting.
What is your comment on that these countries has agreed to do this pledge today?
Well, it's a pledge, it's a promise. Obviously, we need to see it changed into action and real action. But if they incorporate this within their NDCs, their new national climate plans that all nations are hopefully revising upwards at this moment, then it would go into national legislation, hopefully within their own domestic national legislation, and become something that they have to achieve. So I think it's a very good start, and it's many developing countries as well, including the country of Azerbaijan, which is hosting COP29, so that's a good start.
So Buy More Time is an incredible, important solution. You can find out more on our webpage. But, I mean, we can't wait for policy to happen. So what can individuals like you do, you and me, what can we do here and now? This COP is supposed to be about finance. And finance, every people have some money. You can move this money. Every day you use your money, you can make sure that the money goes into those that are doing better things. Choose the greener alternative. even if you are flying here to Baku, you can actually choose biofuel. You can choose going by train, you can choose going by an electric taxi. When you have the choices available, use the money, and not just the money when you buy things, also when you invest things, your pension money, your savings. And if you're a company, same thing. You can, often the most efficient way to change things is to change the bank account. That can cut your carbon footprint in half. So we need to buy more time and we need to move the money. I think meetings like COP meetings are very, very important.
In tough times, up against difficult tasks, I don't go in for hopes and dreams. What inspires me is human ingenuity and determination.
But the meeting will never solve anything. The people will do. And if we don't see the crisis in the eye, we will not do what it takes.
In July this year, this was us, standing in all that remained of her home after the devastation of Hurricane Beryl. At 85, Florence has become one of the millions of victims of runaway climate change this year alone.
Hello, here Julian from Luxembourg. We are here with 6 people as youth delegation, presenting you every day with a little wrap up from COP29. So Max, what did we learn today?
First, we were in a plenary session with former US Vice President Al Gore, who after losing the 2000 US election to George W. Bush, pivoted his political career to focus on the dangers of climate change. Vice President Gore presented to us his new initiative, Climate Trace, which compiles detailed data concerning where and when climate emissions come from. This is incredibly important because until now, emissions data were based mostly on proxy calculations and estimations from organizations such as NASA. Now we know exactly where emissions come from and what we need to do to stop them. Today we attended what was supposed to be the final informal negotiation session on gender and climate. However, member states failed to agree on a final text. The question now is, have the negotiations collapsed? We spoke to Claudia Rubio from the Women and Gender Constituency NGO and asked for her take.
So I think the negotiations are dangerously close to collapsing. We are seeing a lack of progress that we weren't expecting. We did expect better from parties, but there's still a chance. There's still a chance of this pushing forward and of this and of us still getting that renewal of the Lima work program that we need, and that is a necessity for gender to be integrated successfully into the UNFCCC.
You may ask, why does gender matter?
The only way to really make solutions that work is to consider how it's impacting, who it is impacting, and then developing things that are considerate of that.
Then we heard a bit about what is at stake, specifically the future of the Lima work program, which seeks to protect women and gender minorities from the disproportionate effects of climate change.
So basically, the Lima work program, so we had the first Lima work program, and this is the enhanced Lima work program, and we have the GAP, which is it's basically how you operationalize the Lima work program. So it's how you take a work program, which many times seems this very ambiguous, nebulous thing, and you make it what are the actions? How do we execute this? So what we're fighting for here is the renewal of the Lima work program. The Lima work program was already enhanced, so we had a real process where we debated this. So this entire process has been more than a decade long, and this is the version that is we're advocating now for this to happen again.
So then, of course, we asked, what needs to happen? What are the demands and priorities of civil society?
The rights of so many different communities, and just recognizing that differentiation is key. So we cannot accept the backtracking of human rights language at all, or the backtracking of previously agreed language. That is an absolute priority for us. And then the urgent request is for parties to prioritize gender, to understand the implications of this decision, to really try to bridge the gaps between the differences, and that's also a request for the presidency and everyone involved, and civil society to bridge, like let's make all the effort to like bridge the gap between those differences and really produce an outcome that is strong, that is intersectional, that is inclusive, that is operationalized through finance, that like leads to national level action. Like these are all the things that we're prioritizing and like feels important that we prioritize collectively.
This begs the question, what can civil society actually do or achieve?
Civil society is powerful, but again, we're like the observers. So I feel like, yes, it's true. We have different ways of like approaching parties. And a lot of that is like bearing witness, and a lot of it is like protesting, and a lot of that is like being outside on the halls and like just like being in this space, which is a privilege to be in this space. Like as civil society, we recognize that not most of the people who are most affected by climate change cannot be here because of limited resources, because of limited like access to these spaces. So it is a privilege to be here, and as civil society, it's our duty also to like make sure that we're sharing that out to the world, and that we're making sure that activists who are like on the front lines of the communities are realizing like, oh, this is what's happening there. This is how it'll impact us. Like, how do we make this like digestible so that people know that if the decision is integrated into the CMA, this means what? And like, how do we actually make people understanding what the impact is for their lives and like at a local level?
This then raises the next question. How does global advocacy connect to local realities?
The important thing about global advocacy is not like how it impacts like the international community, it's like how it impacts at national level. So how do we create something that is like strong at a national level, at a global level, so that at a national level we can have like also strong solutions and also strong legislation. So this is like, it sets the tone and it sets the stage for like the entire world, for all parties involved in the process. So, yeah.
And lastly, of course, we asked, why should youth activists get involved?
Get involved, you know, like look at it from like I feel like ask questions, be curious about this process, like understand what it means to like engage in this global process and how you can adapt that to your home. Like the struggle that is being fought here, like the fight that's being fought here has impacts at local level. So for all the youth like out in the world and all the activists out in the world, like this is our battleground, you know, like this matters to us and like this will impact your lives.
That was it from Claudia Rubio, who is an incredible activist for the rights of women and gender minorities. You heard her. If you can, if you have the opportunity, get involved. If you try, you might fail. If you don't try, you'll definitely fail. And that is something that in this context, we just can't afford.
The next 2 days at COP are very challenging, but let's hear from two of the delegation members, Julian and Max, what happened at COP29.
We've just come from the European Union's press conference where we discussed different perspectives on the draft text that was released by the COP29 presidency this morning. We spoke as well to the head of the Panamanian delegation, who told us that this text doesn't bring us closer to mitigation, but rather to extinction. We also asked him for his message to young people. Here it is. So clearly the negotiations are not where they need to be at the moment. We were wondering how you would explain that to young people and what your message is to young people who care about the climate.
We're failing you. We have been failing young people for the past 32 years, and it feels like we're failing young people once again. However, we still have 2 days of work, and I want to remain optimistic that we can get it across the line. I want to remain optimistic that we're going to get a finance goal. I want to remain optimistic that we're going to have a strong provisions on mitigations, because otherwise we're just stepping further and further and further into extinction, and that is just not acceptable for Panama, it's not acceptable for the developing world, and it's not acceptable for the young people and civil society.
He clearly says that the older generations are failing us, Julien. He clearly states that this isn't enough and things must change in the next 2 days. What is your perspective on this new text?
So the new draft release this morning came pretty late and with a vast vision. We clearly need the $1.3 trillion for developing countries, and the agreement shouldn't be optional, but it needs to be mandatory.
Yeah, absolutely. So for some context, the text is still quite vague, has lots of different options. The first option is quite solid, actually. It defines who needs to pay up, so developing countries, how they need to pay up in grants rather than in loans, and where that money needs to be spent, so developing countries rather than developed countries who will pay that money. The second option, however, which is more likely to be chosen, includes none of these things and barely includes an increase on the last goal at all, which is barely 1/13 of the amount we need to properly adapt to climate change. As Europeans, we're obviously wondering, where our continent fits in all of this.
So Europe stands divided. The climate commissioner said that this draft is unacceptable, although that our delegates push for these visions in this draft.
Yeah, so that begs the question, what's going on in the European delegation? Why are they pushing for one thing and then calling it unacceptable when it comes? There have been suggestions that the European delegation came here unprepared, but with Wopke Hoekstra's domestic reputation, that seems unlikely. The more likely thing is rather that the European delegation stands deeply, deeply divided. The EU is meant to speak at these global forums with one voice, one vision, and one opinion. However, it seems to me that Wopke Hoekstra is spending most of his time balancing the different opinions of member states rather than speaking with the European voice, and this is causing him multiple issues. For example, the European Union still has not come out with a clear funding goal, a numerical goal for the climate funding. Rumors have said that they're aiming for 200 to 300 billion, which isn't anywhere near enough, but they haven't said anything official, and they probably won't until the very end of the negotiations. There is clearly a deep, rotten problem inside the European delegation, one that must be fixed and one that we must repair in order to speak with a united voice at these events and carry out the will of the European citizens so that they are well represented at these forums.
That's it for today's updates at COP29. Stay with us for last day at COP29.
Be cool, it isn't a joke to walk in the woods, without all the smoke. I love to swim, but not in a flood. We can't grow a crop down in the mud. I want to be cool and get the job done, so we don't get left out to bake in the sun. Let's plant some trees and make some shade from the ground up. That's how change is made. I wanna be cool, how about you? Together there's not one single thing that we couldn't do. Take care of the earth and each other too. Working together, we all can be cool. I wanna be cool, it's gotten too hot. I'm joining the movement to save what we've got. So every girl and every boy can live a good, long, healthy life and find some joy. I wanna be cool, how about you? Together there's not one single thing that we couldn't do. Take care of the earth and each other too. Working together, we all can be cool. Leaders, it's time to lead. Listen to your people in need. The whole world is sweating this out. Can't you hear your kids starting to shout? I wanna be cool, how about you? Together there's not one single thing that we couldn't do. Take care of the earth and each other too. Working together, we all can be cool. I wanna be cool, how about you? Together